3 days had passed since the Forerunner dreadnought had rendered two of the galaxy's most powerful fleets essentially helpless. Kethver had spent those days frantically filing reports with the Coalition Council, trying to explain events that challenged everything the galactic community thought it knew about conflict resolution. The human archaeological team had continued their work with methodical efficiency while the great powers of the sector sat disabled and humbled. Captain Chain had maintained regular communication with all parties, offering technical assistance to restore basic ship functions and seemingly oblivious to the revolutionary implications of what had occurred. "Ambassador," Sefri announced from her station, "we're receiving a general transmission from Captain Chun. She says it's addressed to all vessels in the system." Kethver activated the main viewer, where Chun's image appeared as professional and composed as ever. Behind her, he could see human workers, carefully extracting artifacts from the asteroid fields, while the massive Forerunner ship maintained its watchful presence. "This is Captain Chun to all vessels and personnel in the Kepler sector," she began. "Our archaeological team has completed the primary phase of our research. We've successfully recovered the artifacts we came for, and the Forerunner defense systems are preparing to return to dormancy." Admiral Vextar's voice interrupted from his crippled flagship. "What about our fleets? When will our systems be restored?" Chun's expression didn't change, but Kethver caught something in her eyes that made him pay closer attention. "That depends entirely on you, Admiral. The Forerunner ship's artificial intelligence has been monitoring all communications and behavior patterns since the incident. It will restore your technological capabilities when it determines that you've learned appropriate lessons about peaceful coexistence." "Appropriate lessons?" Commander Torval's augmented voice carried electronic static that suggested ongoing system malfunctions. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means," Chun replied with infinite patience, "that you need to demonstrate that you can resolve disputes without immediately resorting to violence. The AI has been quite clear about this requirement." Kethver watched the tactical displays as ships from both fleets maintained their positions around the asteroid field. Despite their technological limitations, neither force had withdrawn. Military pride and political necessity kept them anchored in place, even as their crews struggled with equipment that had been reduced to barely functional status. "Captain Chun," he interjected, "may I ask what your team discovered during the archaeological excavation?" Her smile was genuine for the first time in days. "Something remarkable, Ambassador. The Forerunners weren't just an ancient civilization, they were refugees. They were fleeing from a war that consumed their entire galaxy, and they came here hoping to build something better." "Refugees?" The concept seemed impossible. Every legend about the Forerunners described them as conquerors or gods, survivors of what they called the Great Consumption, Chun confirmed. Their records describe a conflict that began with resource disputes and escalated until entire star systems were being destroyed. They arrived in this galaxy with whatever technology they could save, determined to prevent the same cycle from repeating itself. She transmitted a data packet that appeared on screens throughout the system. Kethver studied the translated records with growing amazement. The Forerunners hadn't been the aggressive empire that galactic historians had theorized. They had been pacifists who developed their defensive technologies specifically to prevent warfare rather than to wage it. "Their defensive systems," Chun continued, "weren't weapons of conquest. They were educational tools designed to teach younger species how to resolve conflicts without destroying themselves." Admiral Vextar's reptilian features twisted with frustration. "Educational tools? They've crippled our fleets." "They've removed your ability to fight," Chun corrected. "Your life support systems are fully functional. Your communication equipment works perfectly. Your engines operate at sufficient levels for safe travel. They've simply taken away your capacity for violence until you demonstrate that you don't need it." The implications began to dawn on Kethver as he processed the information. The Forerunners hadn't disappeared in some mysterious catastrophe. They had transcended the need for physical presence by creating systems that would guide other species toward peaceful evolution. How do we prove we've learned their lessons? Commander Torval asked, her electronic voice subdued. Start with each other, Chun suggested. The AI is monitoring your interactions. Instead of maintaining hostile positions and planning retaliatory strikes, try working together to solve the original dispute that brought you here. Kethver activated his diplomatic channels to both fleets. If I may suggest, both commanders have legitimate concerns about resource access in this sector. Perhaps we could arrange a joint survey mission to identify sufficient mineral wealth for both parties. For a moment, silence filled the communication networks. Then Admiral Vextar's voice returned, notably calmer than before. The hegemony would be willing to discuss shared mining rights, provided the Alliance agrees to respect our territorial boundaries. The Alliance has no interest in territorial expansion, Commander Torval replied carefully. Our concern has always been ensuring fair access to resources for our member worlds. As the two commanders began actual negotiations instead of exchanging threats, Kethver noticed subtle changes in the system's energy readings. The Forerunner ship's weapon signatures diminished slightly, and power began returning to non-essential systems on both fleets. Remarkable, he murmured to Sefri. The AI is responding to improved behavior patterns in real time. Over the following hours, Kethver watched something unprecedented unfold. Two species that had been preparing for war began working together to solve their resource dispute. The negotiations weren't easy. Centuries of mistrust and political tension couldn't be resolved in a single conversation, but they were happening, Captain. Chun's archaeological team completed their work and prepared to depart, but not before she made one final transmission to all vessels in the system. Ambassador Kethver, Admiral Vextar, Commander Torval, you've witnessed something today that very few beings in galactic history have experienced. You've seen what's possible when species choose cooperation over conquest. She gestured toward the viewing ports where the massive Forerunner ship was slowly reconfiguring itself back into asteroid form. The Forerunners left these systems throughout the galaxy, waiting for younger species to find them. Each one contains the same message, that survival depends not on who can build the biggest weapons, but on who can learn to live without needing them. Admiral Vextar's voice carried a thoughtfulness that Kethver had never heard before. Captain, will there be other sites like this one? Hundreds, Chun confirmed. Maybe thousands. Humans have been finding them for decades, learning from them, trying to understand what the Forerunners were teaching. And what have you learned? Commander Torval asked. Chun paused, considering her words carefully. We've learned that every species reaches a point where they have to choose between growing up or growing extinct. The Forerunners chose to grow up. They created these teaching systems to help others make the same choice. As the human ships departed the system with their archaeological treasures, Kethver found himself reviewing everything he had witnessed. The patterns of conflict he had spent decades documenting suddenly seemed primitive and self-defeating. Wars followed predictable patterns because species kept making the same fundamental mistakes. Sefri, he said quietly, begin a new research project. I want to investigate every rumor, every legend, every whisper about Forerunner sites throughout the galaxy. Sir? His assistant looked puzzled. If the humans have been learning from these systems for decades, that explains a great deal about their behavior patterns. They don't follow our conflict models because they've been taught by a species that transcended the need for conflict entirely. In the days that followed, Kethver's investigation revealed disturbing truths about galactic civilization. The species he had always considered most advanced were actually trapped in cycles of violence that prevented true progress. Meanwhile, humanity had been quietly making contact with Forerunner sites, absorbing lessons about cooperation and conflict resolution that predated most galactic governments. The real revelation came when he discovered that humans hadn't just found one or two Forerunner sites. They had been systematically locating and studying them for over a century, building a comprehensive understanding of what the ancient civilization had been trying to teach. Every time a human archaeological team appeared in disputed territory, they weren't just looking for artifacts. They were implementing Forerunner methodologies for peaceful conflict resolution. The galaxy's newest species had become the inheritors of its oldest. Wisdom. Kethver realized that he had witnessed something far more significant than a mining dispute. He had seen the moment when humanity revealed that they possessed knowledge that could revolutionize galactic civilization. The question now was whether other species would be wise enough to learn from them. As he filed his final report on the Kepler sector incident, Ambassador Kethver included a personal. The 30-minute deadline expired without ceremony. Kethver watched from his observation deck as both fleets moved into attack positions, their weapon systems fully charged and targeting the small collection of human vessels. The Defiant and its three companions had spread into a loose formation near the asteroid belt, apparently preparing to begin their archaeological work despite the overwhelming threat bearing down on them. "This is Admiral Vextar to all human vessels," the hegemony commander's voice boomed across all frequencies. "You have ignored lawful orders to withdraw. Surrender immediately or face destruction." Captain Chun's response came back almost instantly, her voice calm and professional. "Admiral, this is Captain Chun. We acknowledge your transmission. However, we have legal authorization to conduct archaeological operations in this sector. We will not be surrendering or withdrawing." Kethver had expected this response, but what came next caught him completely off guard. "Furthermore," Chun continued, her tone shifting to something harder, "we've completed our preliminary scans. The artifacts we've detected include active defense systems from the Forerunner ruins. These systems are now protecting our archaeological site. Any attempt to interfere with our operations will be considered an attack on protected historical sites, which violates 17 different galactic preservation treaties." The communication channels erupted in confusion as both fleet commanders tried to process this development. Kethver felt his own confusion deepening. Forerunner defense systems were theoretical concepts. No one had ever proven they actually existed. "Impossible," Admiral Vextar snarled. "Forerunner technology is extinct. You're bluffing." "Would you like to test that theory?" Chun asked pleasantly. What happened next would haunt Kethver's dreams for years to come. The largest asteroid in the belt, which had appeared completely inert moments before, suddenly blazed with ancient energy signatures. Beams of coherent light that defied every known law of physics lanced out from hidden emplacements, striking precise points on both approaching fleets. The beams didn't destroy the ships they hit. Instead, they seemed to analyze them, scanning their hull compositions and weapon systems before withdrawing. The message was clear: the defense systems were active, targeting both fleets, and had chosen not to fire. Yet, what you've just witnessed, Chan explained to the stunned silence, is a targeting demonstration from automated defensive platforms that have been dormant for approximately 12,000 years. They're now under our operational control, per the terms of our archaeological license. Any hostile action against our expedition will trigger their defensive protocols. Kethver could see both fleet commanders struggling to process this impossible turn of events. The tactical situation had reversed completely. Instead of 4 vulnerable human ships facing overwhelming odds, 2 major fleets now found themselves targeted by weapons technology that surpassed their understanding. "You're controlling Forerunner technology?" Commander Torval's augmented voice carried electronic distortions that suggested system overload. That's impossible." "Actually, it's surprisingly straightforward once you understand the activation protocols," Chun replied. "Humans have a particular talent for understanding ancient defensive systems. We've had considerable experience with awakening sleeping guardians." Admiral Vextar's reptilian features twisted with rage on the communication display. "This is deception. Technological fraud. No primitive species could—" His words were cut off as the asteroid's defensive systems responded to his raised voice and aggressive tone. This time, the energy beams struck his flagship directly, but instead of destroying it, they seemed to reach into the ship's computer systems. Every display on the hegemony vessel flickered, showing the same message in multiple languages. "Hostile tone detected. Reducing weapons capability by 15%. Further aggression will result in additional penalties." Kethver watched in fascination as similar messages appeared on Alliance ships. The Forerunner defense systems weren't just protecting the archaeological site, they were actively monitoring the behavior of everyone in the vicinity and responding to aggression with measured countermeasures. How is this possible? He found himself asking aloud. Simple, Chun's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. Forerunner defensive protocols weren't designed to destroy threats. They were designed to teach better behavior. The more aggressive you become, the more your capabilities are reduced. Eventually, hostile forces become completely unable to attack anything. The implications struck Kethver like physical blows. This wasn't just advanced technology, it was a completely different philosophy of conflict resolution. Instead of defeating enemies through superior firepower, the Forerunners had created systems that made aggression itself counterproductive. Of course, Chun continued, the systems also respond positively to cooperation and reasonable behavior. Species that demonstrate peaceful intentions receive technological bonuses instead of penalties. As if summoned by her words, the human ships began displaying energy signatures that exceeded their apparent technological level. Their weapon systems, which had seemed primitive minutes before, now showed power readings that rivaled anything in either fleet. This is extortion. Admiral Vexstar protested, though his voice was noticeably calmer after witnessing what happened to aggressive behavior. This is archaeology, Chun corrected firmly. We're simply conducting our research under the protection of the site's original security measures. You're welcome to remain in the system as long as you don't interfere with our work. Kethver noticed something troubling in the tactical displays. While the conversation continued, both fleets were slowly adjusting their positions, not retreating but clearly maneuvering to surround the asteroid field. Despite the technological disadvantage they faced, neither commander seemed prepared to simply withdraw. Sefri, he whispered to his assistant, are you monitoring fleet communications? Her scaled features showed worry as she nodded. Both commanders are discussing coordinated assault patterns. They believe that sufficient concentrated fire might overwhelm the defensive systems. The realization hit Kethver like ice water. Despite everything they had witnessed, despite the clear technological superiority of the Forerunner systems, both fleets were preparing for battle. Military pride and political pressure were overriding tactical sense. Captain Chun, he transmitted urgently, I'm detecting preparation for coordinated assault. Both fleets appear determined to test your defensive capabilities. Chun's image appeared on his display again, but something had changed in her expression. The professional courtesy was gone, replaced by something colder and far more dangerous. I see it, she said quietly. Thank you for the warning, Ambassador. Can your defensive systems handle a full fleet engagement? He asked. The systems can handle anything, Chun replied. But they're not designed for this level of stupidity? Before Kethver could ask what she meant, both fleets opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams, plasma torpedoes, and kinetic projectiles filled space around the asteroid field in the largest coordinated assault he had ever witnessed. The firepower being directed at the human, archaeological site could have sterilized planets. The Forerunner defensive systems responded instantly, but not in the way Kethver expected. Instead of simply absorbing or deflecting the incoming fire, they began demonstrating why ancient civilizations had feared these weapons. Every attack was not just blocked but analyzed, reverse-engineered, and then returned to sender with improvements. Plasma torpedoes that had been fired by hegemony ships came back as coherent energy streams that phased through shields and disabled specific systems without harming crew members. Alliance kinetic projectiles returned as guided missiles that somehow convinced ship computers to open their own airlocks for precise targeting of non-essential systems. Within minutes, both fleets found themselves completely disabled but unharmed. Their weapons were offline, their engines were dead, but life support and communication systems remained fully functional. Now you've done it, Chun said, and her voice carried something that made Kethver's diplomatic instincts scream warnings. The defensive systems were set to educational mode, but you've just convinced them that education isn't working. The largest asteroid began moving. not rotating or shifting slightly, actually moving through space with purpose and direction. As it approached the disabled fleets, Kethver could see that its surface was reconfiguring itself, revealing the massive form of what had once been a Forerunner dreadnought. The Forerunners, John explained in that same coldly professional tone, built their ships to look like asteroids when dormant. This particular vessel has been sleeping for 12 millennia, waiting for someone to wake it up. Congratulations, you just did. Admiral Vextar's voice carried panic for the first time in the transmission. This is impossible. Forerunner. Ships were destroyed in the Great War. Most of them were, Chun agreed. But a few were hidden in asteroid belts, programmed to activate only if their archaeological sites were attacked by people too stupid to understand basic diplomacy. The massive ship that had been masquerading as an asteroid came to a stop directly between the two disabled fleets. Weapons ports opened along its hull, revealing technology that made everything else in the cyst. Ambassador Kethver had witnessed 17 different wars across the galaxy. As a diplomatic observer for the Galactic Coalition, he prided himself on understanding conflict better than most beings in known space. Wars followed patterns, he believed. They had rules. Even when those rules weren't written down, the Zephyrian Empire would attack with precision strikes, targeting strategic locations while minimizing civilian casualties. The Thoric Confederacy preferred overwhelming force, sending massive fleets that blocked out stars. The Crystalline Collective used psychological warfare, projecting terrifying images into enemy minds until surrender became preferable to madness. Every species had their methods. Every conflict had its rhythm. Kethver had documented them all in his extensive reports, earning recognition as one of the Coalition's most skilled conflict analysts. His forearms moved gracefully as he typed his observations, his elongated head tilting thoughtfully as he considered each word. Standing at his observation deck aboard the diplomatic vessel Neutral Ground, Kethver watched the latest territorial dispute unfold in the Kepler sector. The Hegemony and the Free Worlds Alliance had been trading threats for months over mining rights to asteroid belt 447 Delta. Both sides had positioned their fleets at opposite ends of the system. Engines cold, but weapons powered? It was the standard pre-war dance he'd seen countless times. The Hegemony will likely make the first move, he dictated to his recording device. Their admiral, General Vextar, has a history of impatience. I estimate a 73% probability of initial engagement within the next 48 hours. His assistant, a young Valterian named Sefri, looked up from her datapad. Her scaled skin shimmered nervously in the artificial light. Ambassador, we've received word that a new species has entered the sector. They're calling themselves humans. Kethver paused in his dictation. Humans? I'm not familiar with that designation. Where did they come from? Unknown, sir. Their ship appeared at the edge of the system 3 hours ago. It's unusual? Kethver activated the main viewer, adjusting the display to show the new arrival. What he saw made him blink his large eyes in confusion. The human vessel looked primitive compared to the sleek Hegemony destroyers or the Angular Alliance cruisers. It appeared to be cobbled together from different materials, with sections that didn't quite match. Burns and impact scars covered its hull, suggesting either poor maintenance or extensive combat experience. Are you certain this is a spacecraft and not debris? Kethver asked. It's broadcasting on standard diplomatic frequencies, Sefri replied, checking her readings. They're requesting permission to establish a mining operation in the disputed zone. The absurdity of the request struck Kethver immediately. Two major powers were preparing for war over those asteroids, and this unknown species waltzed in demanding mining rights. Either these humans were incredibly naive or supremely confident. Put me through to their vessel, he decided. As a coalition observer, he had the authority to communicate with all parties in the dispute. The communication channel crackled to life, and Kethver found himself looking at one of the strangest beings he'd ever encountered. The human appeared small compared to most galactic species, with pale skin and short hair covering only the top of its head. Most peculiar were its eyes, They seemed to hold an intensity that made Kethver uncomfortable. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the independent vessel Defiant," the human said. Her voice carried a confident tone that didn't match her ship's appearance. "I understand you're the Coalition observer for this sector." "Indeed. I am Ambassador Kethver. I must inform you that you've entered a contested zone. 2 major powers are preparing for combat over these resources. For your safety, I recommend immediate withdrawal." Captain Chian's expression didn't change. "We appreciate the warning, Ambassador, but we have legitimate salvage claims on several asteroids in this belt. We've been tracking their trajectories for months." "Salvage claims?" Kethver's confusion deepened. "These are pristine mining opportunities, not salvage." "Not all of them." Chian touched something off-screen, and a holographic display appeared between them. It showed the asteroid belt with several rocks highlighted in red. These asteroids contained debris from an ancient battle. Specifically, they contained the wreckage of ships from a species called the Forerunners. We've been hired to recover artifacts from that wreckage. Kethver felt a chill run through his diplomatic composure. The Forerunners were legend, an ancient race that had disappeared millennia ago. Their technology was considered mythical by most scholars. If these asteroids truly contained Forerunner ruins, their value would exceed anything the Hegemony or Alliance had calculated. "Captain Chun," he said carefully, "do you have documentation supporting these claims?" "We do," Chun's image flickered as she transmitted data. "Archaeological survey reports, historical trajectory calculations, and authorization from the Terran Archaeological Commission. Everything's legitimate." As Kethver reviewed the transmitted files, his assistant leaned closer. "Sir, if these claims are valid, it could change everything about this conflict." The ambassador nodded grimly. Forerunner technology was priceless. Wars had been fought over rumors of such artifacts. If the humans could prove their claims, neither the Hegemony nor the Alliance would simply withdraw. They would want those artifacts for themselves. "Captain," Kethver said, "I must ask, do you understand the implications of what you're proposing? The powers involved in this dispute will not simply allow you to extract potentially valuable artifacts." For the first time, Captain Chun smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "Ambassador, let me be clear about something. We're not asking permission. We're informing you of our intentions as a courtesy to the Coalition. Our legal claim is solid, our equipment is ready, and our schedule is tight. We start mining operations tomorrow." "But the Hegemony and Alliance fleets are irrelevant to our mission," Chun interrupted. "We've dealt with territorial disputes before. Usually reasonable beings can find reasonable solutions." Kethver stared at the human captain, trying to process her attitude. In his decades of diplomatic service, he had never encountered such casual dismissal of obvious military threats. Either these humans possessed incredible military capabilities hidden aboard their damaged-looking ship, or they were suicidally overconfident. "Captain Chun, I must insist you reconsider. The forces arrayed in this system could destroy your vessel in minutes. Surely your mission isn't worth such risk?" Chun's expression hardened. "Ambassador, let me tell you something about humans. We don't abandon legitimate work because someone else wants to throw their weight around. We've been planning this operation for 2 years. We've invested significant resources. And frankly, we're tired of being pushed around by every species that thinks size equals authority." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Kethver staring at a blank screen. He turned to Sefri, who was monitoring communications from both fleets. "Sir," she said urgently, "both the Hegemony and Alliance have detected the human transmission. They're not pleased." On the tactical display, Kethver watched as ships from both fleets began moving toward the human vessel. The Hegemony's sleek destroyers accelerated smoothly, their energy signatures building as weapon systems powered up. The Alliance's angular cruisers spread into a standard interdiction formation. Blocking potential escape routes, the human ship Defiant continued its steady course toward the asteroid belt, seemingly oblivious to the converging threats. Kethver had observed many David and Goliath scenarios during his career, but none quite this stark. 2 major fleets versus 1 battered vessel seemed less like a conflict and more like an execution. Patch me through to both fleet commanders, he ordered. Perhaps he could prevent unnecessary bloodshed through negotiation. Admiral Vexstar of the Hegemony appeared on the left side of his display, his reptilian features set in their usual stern expression. Commander Torval of the Free Worlds Alliance materialized on the right, her cybernetic implants gleaming as she processed tactical data. Admiral Commander, Kethver began, I believe we have an opportunity to avoid unnecessary conflict. The human vessel has presented legal documentation supporting archaeological claims on specific asteroids. Perhaps we could arrange a compromise. There will be no compromise with claim jumpers, Admiral Vexstar interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to obedience. The Hegemony's sovereignty over this sector is absolute. These humans will withdraw immediately or face the consequences. Commander Torval's augmented voice carried electronic undertones. The Alliance's position is equally clear. No unauthorized vessels will be permitted in the disputed zone. The human ship has 30 minutes to reverse course. Kethver felt the familiar weight of diplomatic failure settling on his shoulders. He had hoped to prevent another pointless conflict, but the species involved seemed determined to fight. What troubled him most was the humans' apparent indifference to their perilous situation. In his experience, beings facing overwhelming force either fled or negotiated. These humans seemed prepared to do neither. Very well, he said finally. I will note both positions in my report. However, I must remind both fleets that the Coalition takes a dim view of unnecessary violence against archaeological expeditions. The